30 seconds.
Good morning and welcome to Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, May 16th at 10 a.m. And before we get started, I'd like to introduce everyone around the table. We'll start by left. Our new Leg Counsel support person.
Good morning, I'm Damon Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. Pleasure to join the committee.
Seth Barnbart, representing Bennington 4.
Carol Odie representing the Farm North End and Burlington.
Jenny Lyons representing Chittenden Southeast, Senator.
Senator Mark McDonald representing Orange County.
Representative Trevor Squirrel, Chair, and representing Underhill and Jericho. We have two members on Zoom. Mark, you want to go first?
Sure. Representative Mark Higley and I represent the Orleans Lamoille District.
David?
Good morning, Dave Weeks, Senator representing Rutland County.
Seeing Senator Bray, maybe he'll be joining us later and supporting us here.
Charlene Bindo, Committee Assistant. Lindsay Schreier, Administrative Assistant.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, folks. We have a fairly full agenda today. First item up will be approval of the minutes of April 25, 2024. Approval, Mr. Chair. We have approval, Senator McDonald. Second. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, first up, as far as rules go, we have 24 P05, Department of Vermont Health Access, Private Non-Medical Institution Rules Simplification. James LaRock. Again, say again, apologies for all the delays we've had over the last couple of meetings and appreciate your patience. The floor is yours.
Sure. Good morning to members of the committee. And my apologies if I seem distracted this morning. We lost a chicken in the rain last night. So I'm a little, if I'm looking out the window every couple minutes, I'm looking for Lisa. If the members of the committee will recall, I think we've already discussed these rules the first time that DEVA was in front of the committee. And I believe there was, the committee was taking the time to look if there were any questions arising under the Division of Rate Settings authorizing statutes under state law, or if the committee had any other questions that needed answering. But if the committee has any questions about this rule package, it's been in front of you a couple times. I'm happy to be here to answer them.
Okay, so any questions from the committee? This is on P05. Does this come out of your committee, Senator Mike?
It did, and then our Leg Counsel made recommendations.
Yes.
So I think we're,
Yeah, I know we sort of started this conversation a while back.
so we're all
And if I may ask, Judge Counsel, Dick Harvey, if you have any additional concerns or the responses were.
Judge Harvey, Legislative Council. I think I'm all set. I will follow up with you folks offline about any next steps.
Okay.
Otherwise, I can go.
All right.
all
Morning, Senator Bray. Good morning. So do I have a motion? And I think this motion would need to be amended based on the information from.
It's a motion to approve the rule with the modifications proposed in the memo dated April 2nd, 2024.
So moved.
Okay, Lyons approve the rule. Any additional conversation? Go. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. And next up is 24 P06, Department of Vermont Health Access, Nursing Home Reimbursement Rules Simplification. James LaRock, you're up again.
Good morning again, and same comments as before. As again, this rule package has been in front of the committee a couple times, so any questions you have on this rule package, I'm happy to answer them.
Same thing, I think we're fine.
Okay.
And should probably check with Leg Counsel. We're both good.
Yeah, okay. And any other comments, questions, members? Seeing none, a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve, as
So
recommended.
same motion.
Same motion.
Yeah, with modifications proposed and dated April 2nd, 2024.
Thank you. So moved.
Okay. Any questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you, James.
Thank you very much for your time. Good morning.
Okay, next up, we have Rule 23-45, Department of Children and Families, Seasonal Fuel Assistance Rules. I believe Richard Giddings, are you speaking?
Richard Giddings is here. My name is Philip Back with the department, and I'll be speaking.
The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Thanks for taking the time to hear from us. I'm attorney Philip Back from the Department for Children and Families, and I'm here with my colleague Richard Giddings, and he runs the Fuel Assistance Program at the department. And we're here to ask you to approve a rule that this committee already approved in March. Unfortunately, when the department first filed this rule in February, there was a formatting error and it deleted 2 sentences. And I didn't notice this error until after the committee's March 28th meeting. The previous provisions weren't particularly significant, but what we filed and what you approved wasn't the complete rule that the department intended to adopt. So we've corrected the rule, and we're here again to ask you to approve the corrected rule, which isn't substantially different from the rule this committee has already it's not different from the rule that the committee already approved in March without objection. I want to apologize for this oversight, but me and Richard are here to answer any questions you have about our corrected filing.
Yeah, the refiling was on the recommendation of the Secretary of State, correct? I understand that.
Yes, I also conferred with your committee assistant, and I agreed that it was for the best because it wasn't like a word or two was missing. It was 2 sentences.
Representative Higley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Philip, can you go over again briefly? It's been quite a while ago, but some of the things that were changed, like removing certification requirements for suppliers of firewood, removing asset and resource requirements for applicants, again, a calculation on income deductions, just some of those critical changes that I can't remember, or if I do, I certainly forgot over time, but could you go over all those?
Of course. So the last time that we adopted rules was in 2009, and the legislature made significant changes to the program in 2010. And the statutes which govern the program have changed a little bit in the 15 years since. So a lot of those changes, which on the surface seem significant, they're all to conform with the statute. All of those, for instance, making our deductions and income calculations the same as the 3 Squares program. That's something that we changed to make it more in align with. I believe that the legislature did away with certification of firewood providers in 2010. And although our rules, the ones that were in existence, still had these outdated requirements, I just want you to know we didn't implement them. We followed the statutes, but our rules are still out of date. There was another provision you brought up. I can't remember, but that was also because of a legislative change, and that's why the rule change was in there. It wasn't something that we sought as a policy change.
Higley, if I could just add, that might be helpful. This is Richard Giddings, the Fuel Program Director. We wanted to allow people that heat with wood to be able to purchase it locally, from their neighbor, from their, person close by. And often when you have a certification process, it's by big loggers and dealers and stuff. So this just allowed for people to be able to kind of direct where they were going to purchase their product. As far as pellets go, people purchase those really from like a Home Depot or Tractor Supply or some of those other major companies that sell them.
Okay, again, so most of these changes are, they have been implemented by you folks. It's just the rules haven't reflected such, right?
Yes, I think that that's right. You know, if you'd like, I can point to specific rules and specific citations if necessary. But that was the real thrust and impetus for this rule, is to modernize them, to get them up to the statutory requirements. So there's no confusion among staff when they read a rule and it says one thing, but we tell them, no, don't follow the rule. You know, we modernized them, we simplified them a bit and just clarified some language. But I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? Senator Bray?
Mr. Chair, I would move that we approve Rule 23 P45 Department for Children and Families Seasonal Fuel System Rules.
Any motion to approve, Senator Bray? Any additional questions, comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Rule 2024 P04, Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, governing the importation of domestic animals, including livestock and poultry. Caitlin Levine. Join us up here. We don't always have visitors.
Well, figured we were just across the street, might as well join you.
Who's this with you?
Good morning, this is Dr. Kristen Haas. She's the state veterinarian. She's here to provide historical context if needed, because this effort actually started before I started. So my name is Dr. Kate Levine. I'm the assistant state vet with the Agency of Agriculture. I'm here to present the first update to the import rules for livestock and poultry in over 25 years. As you can imagine, things have changed since then. So we're hoping to provide this update to bring Vermont back into alignment with current science and federal policy.
Walk through.
Absolutely. So we're a group of people who like table of contents because it makes it easy to find. We're going to have lots of people coming at this rule from various aspects, whether they're veterinarians, other state officials, or livestock stakeholders who are really just interested in their animals. So we tried to structure this in a way that was easy to use for as many people as possible. That context is important because when we get into the structure of the rule, it's very referential. There's the general requirements, most of which have been updated for clarity. And we've really tried to reformat the whole thing, which is why if you go to the track changes document, got a little bit intense because we were trying to make it structure it in a way that was actually able to be referenced quickly. We pared down the definitions quite a bit. We didn't feel the need to define every animal specifically within the definitions, though we did keep them in some locations later in the rule, because what you might think of as an equine may not always be what everybody else does. So we wanted to make sure that things like zebra were maintained under horses and equine, because they do have import requirements as well. So in some places, those definitions were required, but we didn't feel the need to define things like negative test and positive test, because that was just making this rule even longer than it needed to be. Additional clarification came through the updates to certificate of veterinary inspection and import rule or import permit. Those are now ordered in the way that they are acquired by the people who are importing animals. First, you need a CVI, then you need an import permit. And once you have completed all of the basic steps, then you get to what is actually required for those specific animals. It's broken down by species, by group. I say that because sometimes you have single species, like in the case of goat. Sometimes you have groups. Cervids, being farmed deer, are taken collectively. Camelids are taken collectively. And as I mentioned earlier, equine involves everything from horses, mules to zebras. We added clarification based on federal rules. That is the most recent update. USDA published their long-awaited ADT rule last Thursday. And it did require that we make some adjustments to our original intention for ID requirements. We just had to redefine it so that back tags and group IDs, which were desired to be phased out, are preempted by the federal rule that they have to be allowed to happen. So we didn't want to be starting out on the wrong foot with our brand new rule. So we removed the requirement to disallow group ID and back tags as originally intended. That was the most recent and the change that ended up on your desk yesterday. If you received a copy of that, that was why, unfortunately, that happened very recently, so we weren't able to get that any sooner. Those are the big overviews. I'm happy to start to take questions, or what is it you'd like to know?
I have a question.
Please.
In your letter to us on May 15th, you mentioned disclaimer that reference to the non-domestic species section.
Yes, there's always been some element of reference to non-domestic species or wildlife, and how we refer to those goes back and forth over the years. Vermont has dual jurisdiction depending on how those animals are being treated. So for example, we have farmed deer and we have wild deer. We have farmed passerine, or we have captive passerines, and we have wild passerines. And so we work very closely with our Fish and Wildlife partners to make sure that it's clear when we have jurisdiction and when they have jurisdiction. When presenting this rule to them, it was outside of the public comment period, but we worked with them throughout the drafting. There was concern about the paragraph, just the section just above the non-domestic species, being the definition of citizen birds, could include species if we didn't walk that line of captive bred, which could accidentally tread on species that are protected by the Migratory Bird Act and other protected species acts. So that paragraph was just added at the request of our Fish and Wildlife partners to make it very clear that we are not in any way stepping on the toes of those protected species.
And is this language that they provided, or is this language you generated and based on?
No, it's language that they provided.
Any members, other questions? Senator Bray.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming in. I just wanted to make sure I sort of know the rule of the road. I think of like ANR as the delegated authority, the president's sort of on behalf of EPA. So is the department, Agency of Agriculture, in essence, sort of the federal delegated authority for the state? Is that how that works?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry.
So rather than EPA operating Vermont directly, they delegate authority to ANR, and they carry out federal mandates as well as state stuff. I just didn't know, is that the same setup for you? You're basically following and implementing federal rules, code, et cetera, as well as Vermont statute.
So USDA has precedent in interstate movements. So there is some element of this that we are beholden to the USDA's rules on, which is reflected in the most recent change to the ID rules, the ID requirements. Beyond that, we are allowed to be stricter than and set certain standards for Vermont. So there are some standards that are set at a federal level, and then anything beyond that, as far as specific disease requirements, or some areas we're allowed to be more restrictive than others, those are set to us. Also, USDA has some limitations as to what species they cover. So we cover a slightly wider variety of species than the USDA does.
And since we're talking about importation of livestock, it's the whole H1N1 thing going on right now. Can you say a little bit about what Vermont's experience is and how that rule relates to that vector and that exposure?
So the federal order that was released at the end of April is a little outside of the scope of this. This is the general framework that is currently a specific disease instance. That would be best captured in our general authority in section 2, in that occasionally things come up that we don't expect. And we do have the authority to implement rules and requirements above and beyond during specific disease outbreaks. And so that would fall under this current H1N1 event.
Okay. The last quick question is, we have, it seems like in the last 15 years, Vermont's growing more beef, for instance. And how does the rule relate to, I guess our things like farm to plate programs are all the programs that agencies been helping step up for local food production?
This is really only focused on the importation of animals from outside of Vermont. This doesn't affect resident animals or the intrastate movement. Animal Health has passed rules about that control, or passed statutes about that control in the late teens, but this is focused just on bringing animals from out of state into Vermont and making sure that those animals are brought in a way that protects the resident livestock.
Yes.
We have Senator Donald and Senator Lyon. And then
Senator Bray mentioned the H1N1. Week ago, there was a substantial story in the New Yorker about H1N1 being a bird flu that was jumping to cattle, and a federal regulation coming down that anytime there were imports that had 30 of the cattle had to be given a level of inspection not currently called for. Does this rule deal with that, or is I'm surprised that he would be so nimble as to have picked up on that. What's the status?
Yes, so this rule incorporates many of the philosophies that are being discussed in that movement restriction. So that order is being currently very focused on just lactating dairy cattle who are moving interstate. The requirements that are being imposed on that group of animals, for the most part, are already part of the rule. They require inspection by a veterinarian, they require official ID, and the concept of requiring disease testing is very much in the spirit of the rule. This specific disease instance and the specific tests that are being required are beyond the scope of this update, except that we have powers to implement disease requirements during significant outbreaks of concern. Beyond that, this rule also, or the federal order, on HPAI requires testing of animals that would otherwise be exempt. So there are ways that cattle move through markets direct to slaughter that are exempt from certain conditions and certain testing requirements, because those animals are seen as not a large risk to disease spread, because they are going, their ultimate goal is to be slaughtered, and therefore they are not at risk to spread disease any longer. That gap, those movements often go through a livestock market, which is part of, in this rule, referred to as a slaughter channel, and so would be typically exempt from certain disease testings. The federal order as written doesn't have those exemptions. that is causing some issues and is an ongoing conversation. Those exemptions are there for not only ease of movement in high risk, or not high risk, high importance in movements, because animals that need to be called quickly often. And so those exemptions, as outlined in our standard rule, are more in line with industry standards than the current federal policy for this particular outbreak. So it is both capturing the spirit of and deviates from in some pretty important ways.
Senator McDonald, may I add to your surprise at our ability to be nimble is warranted, because this is coincidental that this import rule is happening at the same time that the H5N1 situation is occurring. So
the article talked about inspecting more animals than had previously been inspected, and a concern that having jumped from birds to cattle, that they wanted to make sure they wanted to enhance the inspections for fear that they would get to pigs, which are an easier step to humans than
So the jump from birds to cattle has actually only happened once, which is an important thing to know just from a disease standpoint. Beyond that, as far as the increased inspection goes, the only group of animals that would require inspection under the federal order that wouldn't otherwise been required are those animals who are going to slaughter through a market. So animals that are going direct to a slaughter market or a slaughter facility don't need to be inspected, and any animal that's going anywhere else has always needed to be inspected. So there is the federal rule as it is currently written only requires inspection of lactating dairy cattle who are going to slaughter through an out-of-state market are the only new group of animals that are being inspected. Our requirements here in Vermont have always been fairly protective and extensive. We don't have many exemptions by age, by use that other states do have. So as far as animals coming into Vermont, we've always had a fairly high level of veterinary inspection and oversight. Our rules are very protective. So there is a very small category of animals that are being increased for that. But overall, we've always had a really good eye on what's coming into the state.
COVID-19 only jumped once in one place.
And
That couldn't have.
but what it comes down to is that we are inspecting those animals is really what the point is. Any animal that is coming into Vermont for any reason other than to be processed into meat is being inspected with or without this order. So this order doesn't really affect animals coming into Vermont, except for the animals who are coming from out of state to one of our livestock markets and then going on to slaughter. Every other animal would have already been inspected, I guess is the point.
So if the vets believe that there's a concern beyond which the recent article spoke of, we could expect the agriculture department to sound an alarm and
we are in meetings about this every day. We are working closely with regional and national partners to try to make sure that we are tracking the spread. There are animals within Vermont being tested just out of regular surveillance and as part of the federal order. The animals who are showing signs of disease of any kind aren't allowed to be imported into Vermont because of the need for this veterinary inspection as part of a regular process. So it's not that we're not dismissing the fear. It's just that we're already covering it. These rules are protective. They're structured in a way to ensure that we do have eyes on those animals. This additional testing is one more disease that we are now testing for, but it's not novel to the spirit of the rule.
Mr. Chair, the spirit of rules and the science of rules don't usually come about at the same time.
The originators of the 1998 rule, which is the one we have in place, did a remarkable job of capturing the need to have as few loopholes as possible. The Vermont rules have always been pretty extensive. The use categories that I reference, federal rule likes to carve out exemptions for by age, by purpose, by breed. We don't do that. We say every animal needs to be inspected, every animal needs to be ID'd, because we believe that they're all at risk to spread disease, and we think they should all have that same level of scrutiny. So,
All those of us that are concerned, we speak with the Agency of Agriculture about this new one and move forward with the rules before us, which, if they are, they're as timely as we're gonna get today. Thank you.
Senator Lyons.
Well, thanks. I think most of my questions have been answered with regard to disease spread. So just in terms of COVID today, or what kind of, if any, testing are you doing?
for COVID,
Any COVID testing at all?
no, not through our agency.
Okay.
Not in domestic animals.
Not in domestic.
There's
animals.
wild animal surveillance and of course, human.
Yeah, okay. But H1 and H1N1, if you see any examples beyond the one, then you would kick into high gear.
Well, what I wanted to draw the distinction between the events that are happening with birds, for example, so wild birds spread to domestic birds
Right.
regularly. I wish there was a better word for it than that. But it is currently still very much a problem, and it is a thing that we are testing for, we are on the lookout for within the state. Anytime anybody has a sick bird, I was sad to hear that someone had recently lost a chicken. At least it was storm related, because if it had been anything else, I would have been like, all right, who's that? And do I need to speak with them? When it comes to cattle, however, we don't have a case here, and it's not spreading from wildlife the same way that it is to the domestic birds. So within cattle, there was a single event from wildlife to the cattle in Texas, and then all of the new cases since then have been movement related. And so there isn't the same spontaneous popping up as there is with the wild bird part of this. So when it comes to the cattle testing, that's happening in response to movement and this federal order. It also happens if a veterinarian and farmer recognize that there are certain signs on the farm that are concerning them. Then they can call us. We walk through testing. We have a procedure for that. It is just beyond the scope of this rule, but that testing is happening whenever it is appropriate, either for pre-movement testing or in response to clinical signs of concern.
Yeah, just another question in terms of compliance. So if, someone goes across the line to New Hampshire, Vermont, to New York, and bring back a domestic animal, what responsibility do they have for testing?
It depends on.
Are we seeing that happening? That's just a question.
In general?
Yeah.
Yes. So anytime you cross a border, you are beholden to the state of destination's requirements. So if someone's going from Vermont to New York, they'd have to follow New York's requirements, and back into Vermont, you'd have to follow Vermont's. There are testing requirements for various purposes, depending on what species we're talking about. And so.
No, just seriously, are you seeing people calling up or getting a permit or doing what they need to do in order to comply with that?
Every day. Yeah, absolutely. Our import permit requirement is on any species that has variable testing. And so we have a purposely old school method for that, which is you have to call our office and talk to us. We have to know that you have a CVI, that you have the ID in place, that you've done the testing that you're required for. And if you've done all that, you get an import permit number. What's wonderful about that system is that it means that as the federal rules, federal orders have these situations, we can be nimble, to use the phrase, because they still have to call us, and now we can ask these questions again. Even before the federal order was in place, we had flags on the regions of the country where these cows were coming from, because we wanted to know that those animals were coming so we could talk to them. So we could be on the lookout if we needed to be more restrictive. So people are calling, livestock dealers, animal owners, veterinarians, all of them call various aspects of our office all the time for compliance.
Thank you. And then we also have Canada. So when things go back and forth, there are federal rules that are in play.
Yes.
Representative Higley.
Thank you. I believe I just heard that federal guidelines for importing dogs was 6 months old, vaccinated for rabies and chipped. Is that anything that you folks regulate or deal with?
That is beyond the scope of this import rule. This import rule is for livestock and poultry. There are state laws that deal with dog importation, but that is a national border determination. So that is a federal level and beyond the scope of what this rule deals with.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Brett.
Questions, I would move that we approve 24 Agency of Agriculture Food Markets rules governing the implementation of domestic poultry as amended by the 15/2024.
Vote from Senator Bray to approve as amended.
Second.
Second. Any additional questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next up, we have 24 P01, Department of Health regulations for lead control. Next, Department of Health, and then Brenda Dafford, Public Health Policy Director, Department of Health. Whoever's going, go.
So I just will say that I did sign off on this rule as being meeting the intent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having me. My name is Meg McCarthy, and I'm the Compliance and Enforcement Advisor in the Environmental Health Division at the Health Department. And with this, the department is proposing to amend the Vermont regulations for lead control. The purpose of the rule is to provide the requirements for training, licensing, and work practices for lead-based paint activities and renovation, repair, and maintenance activities to prevent the creation of lead hazards that can cause lead poisoning. And the changes made through this rulemaking, I'll give a brief overview of those. So Act 47 of 2023 amended Title 18 to change the licensure requirements for rental property owners, residential rental property owners, conducting repair work on their pre-1978 rental properties. It eliminated the requirement for liability insurance. So this rulemaking updates the rule to reflect that change. We've been
Hey, can you hear it? Video's frozen. The electronic version. Meg,
insurance requirement as required by Act 47.
Meg, just 1 second. You were frozen there for a while, so we lost you.
Oh, no. Okay.
So what I suggest you turn your video off and maybe go back a paragraph.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Only one paragraph.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, I apologize for that. I'll just go back and say, I'm just giving a brief overview of the changes that we are undertaking with this rulemaking. So Act 47 amended Title 18 to change the licensure requirements for rental property owners conducting repair work on their own pre-1978 rental properties. It eliminated the requirement for liability insurance. So this rulemaking updates our rule to reflect that change. We also made additional changes for consistency with federal law and other states' lead control regulations. So specifically, we eliminated the requirement for liability insurance for rental property owners getting a license to do RRPM work on their own properties as required by Act 47. We amended the activities licensed owners of rental target housing can conduct when doing those RRPM activities without that liability insurance. We amended items to be consistent with federal law, including adding a hands-on component to the refresher training requirement for lead safe RRPM training, and added a definition of dry disposable cleaning cloth. And then finally, we eased the training and experience requirements for lead-based paint inspectors to be consistent with other states. In terms of public comment, we did reach out to all lead licensees and certificate holders, as well as EMP and IRC filers, to alert them to the rulemaking, the public hearing, and the public comment period, inviting them to submit comments on this rulemaking. And in drafting the rule, we also worked with several owners of rental target housing who provided feedback on the rule and the proposed changes. Generally, the commenters were supportive of the changes made to eliminate that requirement for liability insurance for rental property owners doing work on their own properties. However, commenters also suggested several other changes to the rule, which we took into consideration, but after consulting with our legal counsel and due to constraints with the federal RRP requirements and our obligation to be as protective as the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, and our own existing state statutes, many of those changes requested by stakeholders were not feasible for us to make. And in some cases, those changes were also not, suggested by commenters were not protective of public health. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the rulemaking.
Members, any questions? We did receive some testimony from an individual I believe was involved in the legislation that was just this year.
In 23.
In 23, okay. And
Worked hard on it.
And Alan Burke, I think is the individual's name. And Ledge Counsel Katie McGlennon has responded also in an email to members of this committee saying that she felt that the legislation was passed to concern, at least mostly addressed that were brought up by this individual, and probably maybe voiced by other individuals. That your understanding?
Yes, that's my understanding. I was looking at Katie McClennan's comments, and they're consistent with the discussion that we had as we wrote the bill put in place.
Any questions, comments for Meg? Senator Bray.
Mr. Chair, I would move approval of Rule 24P01, Department of Health Regulations for Lead Control.
Any questions, comments?
Second.
Okay. Second. All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, you've approved the rule. Thank you. Okay, the next, we're gonna have to take a break, committee members, because the individual that was providing testimony on this rule asked to be moved to the 11:25 slot. We've moved much quicker than I anticipated through the agenda. Charlie?
We could bring up the committee discussion.
I will do that. Yeah, you mean the schedule, non-session schedule, you mean?
Yeah.
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 But I think we'll take a break and then come back in, let's say 15, 20 minutes.